What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic channel. Today, we're talking college football DFS ahead of Week 12, the Wednesday Maction doubleheader. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're brought to you by Prize Picks. They have a first match deposit bonus up to $100 for new users. They're also giving you one free month of Odd Shopper, where we have all kinds of sports betting tools, sides, totals, player props, which will help you directly with Prize Pick or older to play. All right, bring you behind the glass to our player usage tool. We have this as well as projections, ownership projections for college football. If you want that, link in the video description below. Kick things off with Central Michigan taking on Ohio. The spread is 8.5. The total is 46. Central Michigan is a tricky team to talk about. They've been using Jace Bauer primarily at quarterback because of an injury to Bert Emanuel. Certain games, they're really run heavy. Certain games, they're extremely pass heavy. Their usage of Jace Bauer has been inconsistent. So this team is 86th in pace overall. They have a 45% pass rate. Just know that there isn't a lot of consistency with that number. To the quarterback position, Jace Bauer still handled all of the pass attempts in their last game. Bert Emanuel did return from his injury, and he handled 3 carries, but he barely played any snaps. I don't think they continue to use him more and ramp him up. I think he's just going to be a situational gadget, Wildcat-style quarterback, whereas Jace Bauer is going to handle most of the work. So if I'm playing one of them, it's still Bauer, but I do prefer getting to Rourke on the other side, and we'll talk about the quarterback situation as a whole. So Bauer, I think he's in play, but he's not my personal favorite. In the backfield, we have Marion Luke still handling a large workload. Miles Bailey tried to return last game. He re-aggravated his ankle injury on his first carry. I would be shocked if we see him in any capacity. And honestly, most of those carries that went to Miles Bailey could just go to Bert Emanuel. Obviously, he's hard to play because he's required to be in the Superflex. But all this to say, I think Marion Luke's is pretty safe. He has touch counts of 23, 22, and 21 over the last 3 games. In the receiving room, it's been a pretty nasty rotation for the Central Michigan team, and I don't know if it's going to get any better. You also run the risk of, if they get up, I mean, they're just going to run the ball a lot. So I think the number one is Jesse Pruitt. His routes have pretty consistently been over 80%. I think Chris Parker is your 2. Route rates north of 70% in 4 straight games. The wide receiver 3 is where things get tricky because it had been Tyson Davis. He returned from injury last game, but only 23% of the routes. They rotated him with Stephen Bracey, who was at 17, Thomas Panunzio, who was at 40%. I don't have a great read on this. Even guys like Javorian Wimberly were out there for a handful of routes. Langston Lewis. So the 3 is not very clear. If you force me to pick one of these players, I would guess Tyson Davis still occupies that role. But what are we going to do? Pay more for Tyson Davis than we would for Jesse Pruitt or Chris Parker? I don't think so. So for me, I'm still trying to get to those 2 guys over Tyson Davis. And then on the Ohio side, we have Curtis Rourke, who I personally like a lot. I think he's too cheap. I'd rather play him straight up over Bauer. The pass rate for Ohio is 50%. They're 113th in pace. Rourke only averages 28 attempts per game, but he does run a little bit. He has 196 yards. Not as mobile as like a Jace Bauer. But I guess one thing I kind of glossed over, and to just circle back to Jace Bauer, designed rushing attempts of 14, 2, 18, and 2. What are we getting with Jace Bauer? Are we going to get 2 attempts or are we going to get 20? I don't know. There's seemingly no in between. It's either he doesn't run at all or he's the engine of their offense on the ground. Anyway, Rourke is the opposite. He's really consistent. 4, 5, 5, 6. It's basically, you're getting 5 to 6 rush attempts every single week with Rourke. 196 yards in the ground. And then they just throw the ball a lot more than Central Michigan, so I think you access the ceiling through the air. He hasn't been great this year, just 197 yards per game on 28 attempts. But last year, Rourke was the MAC Player of the Year. The Central Michigan defense is horrific. They allow 8 yards per pass attempt, 4.7 yards per carry. So I do like Rourke. I prefer him to Bauer. I think he's safer. You don't have to worry about any of the Bert Emanuel stuff. In the backfield, it's essentially been a 50-50 committee all year long. And last week, they decided to throw their chips in on Say Bangura. 17 carries to O'Shane Allison's 4. That was a bit of a surprise to me, but I think we at least need to consider this moving forward. Bangura does have an outside chance at like a 20 carry game. Again, I think most of the time they do split to some degree. Moving forward, we're going to project this around a 65-35 split, but we had been projecting 50-50, so this is positive towards Bangura. He's usable here in a cupcake matchup against Central Michigan. O'Shane Allison's a bit expensive, but if you played Maction on Tuesday night, you know these backup backs can get there at any time. Jock Stewart. All right, the Ohio receiving game. Been a really poor year across the board for these players. I think a lot of it's systemic, coming from Rourke, coming off the injury. Just not the same team they were last year. And Sam Wiglutz, man, he's really disappointed. But what I'll say is his underlying metrics are awesome. He's participated in 100% of the routes in 2 straight games, then above 95% in 4 straight. Eventually, there's going to be a big game for Wiglutz, and I don't want to be missing out when he's now coming down in price. I know just 2 targets last game, not ideal, but still leads the team. Most efficient receiver by far. I'll still prioritize him, especially with Miles Cross only being $400 cheaper and then Tyler Walton being $700 cheaper. Cross, he's very clearly there too. He's been above 90% of the routes in 3 of the last 4. Walton's routes bounce a little bit more, 61%, 73, then up to 90, back down to 69, back up to 83 last game. So, I mean, you don't have as much consistency with Walton. And then the tight end position is a complete mess. It's basically a rotation between Tyler Foster and Will Kasmerick. I think they're both just like showdown guys. I think this game's a showdown. I actually don't remember. But anyway, not really in play for the main slate. I don't find there to be too many price restrictions, and there's some cheaper guys we'll talk about in the next game that kind of open things up. So I don't think you need Foster or Kasmerick. Buffalo takes on Miami, Ohio in our second game. This is a 9.5-point spread in favor of Miami, Ohio. And the total is 41.5, so not as much interest in this game. Buffalo's 50th in pace, and they pass the ball 50% of the time. Miami, Ohio is extremely slow. They are 131st in pace with a 42% pass rate. We'll circle back to that in a second, but let's start with Buffalo. This team is moving to a quarterback platoon situation. Cole Snyder and CJ Ogbonna, they almost split snaps 50-50. But from a game planning perspective, I think this is probably easy to address. Cole Snyder handled almost all the pass attempts, and Ogbonna handled almost all the run attempts. So it's like you tip off the defense immediately what you're doing when one of these guys comes into the game. But anyway, for DFS, the split makes this almost impossible to target, especially at their price tags. The only way I'd have interest is if like Ogbonna got the start and we got news that he was going to handle most of the reps, which won't come. In the backfield, they did bench Mike Washington. I don't know if this was performance or injury related, but the guy had only a handful of snaps and he only had 1 carry, also uninvolved in the pass game. This coincided with not only doubling their chips down on Ron Cook, who had his second consecutive 15-plus carry game, but CJ Ogbonna had 12 carries. They almost just took everything that Mike Washington was getting and just fed it directly to the Wildcat quarterback. Jock Barksdale, his role remains pretty consistent. He's averaging 6.5 touches per game. He had 6 carries in the most recent contest, so just a change of pace option. Interesting to see him play over Mike Washington again. I don't know what the issue is there. But for price perspectives, I think Ron Cook is fine. Right now, there's a lot of builds that are going to get him just because he saves more money than Rashad Amos, Bangura, or Marion Lukes, but I still would rank him 4th. I don't love him overall against a very good Miami, Ohio run defense, but if you need him, I can see the merits of playing him. The receiving game, I do think we want to get here because Buffalo throws the ball so much, 50% of the time. You also have cheap options really across the board. Maryland Johnson's their 1, Cole Harity's their 2. They're 47 and 3,600. Cole Harity's not exciting, but I do like playing him as a salary saver, just to get other studs in your lineup. When you look at the routes, they've been completely fine for him. His route rate still at 76% last game. It had been above 80 in the 4 straight games prior. Maryland Johnson, he's locked in as the 1, but he does come with a little bit more salary restrictions. They split the wide receiver 3 between Booby Curry and Daryl Harding. I don't have a strong preference between them. I guess Curry would be my preferred just because he has more targets and he's a little bit cheaper, but I don't feel strongly about that. I think you can mix and match them. One last thing, Nick McMillan did return. He'd been out for like 7 games or something ridiculous. His route rate wasn't great, just 25%, but maybe there's a chance he emerges and takes on more at the expense, I would guess, of like a Curry or a Harding. We just don't know. Last thing, we've had a ton of tight end injuries for this Buffalo team. Jake Orlando's been out. There's been a few others. I'm not going to run through them all. But Cameron Ball had an 88% route rate. Obviously, he hasn't been targeted in 3 straight games. But, I mean, you're out there running around an 88% of dropbacks. I at least need to mention it on the stream. I'm not going to say play him or anything like that. He only has 1 target in the last 4 games. But, yeah, he's out there a lot. Just worth mentioning. Miami, Ohio, so they lost Brett Gabbert for the year, and their offense has completely morphed under Avion Smith. They're still extremely slow, but like this team's run rate pushes 70% in some games. So seeing like a pass rate of 42%, if this plays to the spread of 9.5 and Miami, Ohio is winning this game, they might pass the ball 25% of the time or less. I don't know. Luckily for Avion Smith, he is involved in the run game. His designed rush attempts over the last 2 contests are 16 and 11. Buffalo is allowing 5.3 yards per carry. So I still do like Avion Smith. You almost have to treat him like an armed forces quarterback running the triple option at this point, though, because the team is so run heavy. He's only averaging 42.5 passing yards per game. It's tricky. Also why I think Rourke is the best play, just safer than Central Michigan or this Miami, Ohio situation. In the run game, Rashad Amos is still being a monster, even with Avion Smith handling a large majority of the work on the ground. Not a majority, a large portion of the work. Amos, last 2 games, 21 carries, 15 carries. No issues playing him. He does not receive pass game work. You just have to know that if Buffalo gets up in this game, Rashad Amos might be cooked. That's unlikely with the current spread. Kenny Tracy did have 8 carries. Kevin Davis had 3. These players are used more in the pass game, so I don't know. They're maybe worth sprinkling in tournaments, but I would still rather get up to Amos if possible. Probably the biggest injury news in the slate. I mean, it's the max. Sometimes news pops up, but at least heading into the day, the biggest news is Gage Larvadain at wide receiver. Left after about 72% of the routes with a hamstring injury. Doesn't appear to be severe, so I'm expecting him to play. Just make sure you watch the news. Larvadain has been just absolutely destroyed by this new offense under Avion Smith. 10 combined targets in the last 2 games, some of that due to injury. Efficiency just plummeting. Honestly, I wish they would just throw him some screens or something because, man, he's awesome. It just sucks that he's now not really that usable. What I will say is there's not like a ton of alternatives on this slate for really good receivers outside of like Wigluts and stuff. So I still think Larvadain can be played. I'm definitely going to use him just based on the talent alone, but I'm no longer viewing him as a priority on this slate. For reference, if you decide to play 3 or 4 elite backs and you just can't get yourself up to Larvadain, I have no issues with that. If he's out, this could be big for a guy like Joe Wilkins, the Notre Dame transfer. Big as in probably more than the 3 targets he's seen the last 2 games, but another very talented player that's on the field every single snap, cannibalized by the offense changing into basically Army. Otherwise, Cade McDonald's been missing games for this team. Haven't seen his status updated, but he's sort of consolidated opportunity to some degree for the other players. Larvadain, Wilkins, and Miles Marshall's been playing a lot, as well as Javon Tracy. I think the weirdest thing was Javon Tracy, 95% of the routes last game. That is dependent on Cade McDonald sitting. Again, I don't know what the injury is or why he's missing time, but I do think Javon Tracy is somewhat viable as a very cheap, nearly stone min dart throw. Miles Marshall, I would rather just play Tracy overall. And then tight end, they do rotate tight ends, so I don't think you want to play any of those guys. That'll do it for us. Let me know in the comment section what you think. And if you have a question, reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Matt_Gajewski. We'll be back all throughout the week talking college football DFS. So until next time, good luck, everyone. We'll see you again later.